3 days had passed since the flood. 3 days of Rebecca staying in a small motel near the reservation, while her bruises faded from purple to yellow-green, and her shoulders slowly stopped throbbing with every movement. Daniel had been there every day, bringing her food, checking on her injuries, but something was different between them now. There was a careful distance he maintained, like he was afraid to get too close. She understood why. She'd broken his trust, and trust wasn't something you could just patch up with apologies and promises. It had to be rebuilt, slowly, through actions instead of words. On the 4th day, Daniel knocked on her door earlier than usual. "Get dressed," he said. "There's someone I want you to meet." He drove them out to the reservation, to a small house with a carefully tended garden and prayer flags hanging from the porch. An older man sat in a rocking chair, his weathered face breaking into a smile when he saw Daniel. "Grandfather," Daniel said, and the respect and love in his voice was obvious. "This is Rebecca, the woman I told you about." The old man studied her with eyes that seemed to see right through her surface to everything underneath. Rebecca resisted the urge to fidget under that gaze. "So you're the photographer who almost got herself killed," he said finally, his voice surprisingly strong. "Sit down, child. Let's talk." They sat on the porch, drinking the coffee the old man's wife brought out, and for a while no one said anything. Rebecca had learned over the past week that comfortable silence was a part of Apache culture, that not every moment needed to be filled with words. "My grandson tells me you remind him of his wife," the old man finally said, "but that you're also different. I want to hear your story. Not the version you tell other people. The real one," so Rebecca told him. About her marriage and how it fell apart. About her ex-husband's ultimatum and the choice she'd made. About the guilt and shame that had followed her like a shadow. About coming to the canyon to escape, to prove something, to maybe punish herself a little bit. "And did you prove it?" the old man asked. "Whatever you came here to prove." "No," Rebecca admitted. "I almost died instead. Daniel saved my life, twice. He has a habit of saving things," the old man said, looking at his grandson with affection. "Always has. Even as a little boy, he was bringing home injured birds and broken things, trying to fix them. After his wife died, he tried to save everyone, thinking maybe if he saved enough other people, he could make up for the one he lost." Daniel looked uncomfortable. "Grandfather," "Hush, I'm old. I get to say what I want." The old man turned back to Rebecca. "But here's what my stubborn grandson won't tell you himself. His wife's death wasn't his fault. She made her own choices, just like you made yours. The only difference is you survived yours and got a chance to learn from them." "I don't know what I'm supposed to learn," Rebecca said quietly, "except that I'm reckless and selfish and I hurt people who care about me." "Is that what you think?" The old man shook his head. "You're not selfish, child. You're lost. There's a difference. A selfish person wouldn't feel this guilty, wouldn't care about the consequences of their actions. You care too much, actually. You just care about the wrong things, and what do you mean? You care about proving your worth through your work, about validating your choices, about showing everyone, including yourself, that you made the right decision when you chose your art over your marriage." He leaned forward in his rocking chair. "But here's the truth you're not ready to hear. It doesn't matter if you made the right decision or not. It's done. You can't change the past. The only question that matters is what you're going to do now." Rebecca felt tears stinging her eyes. "I don't know how to do that. How to let go of needing to prove I was right. Start by asking yourself different questions. Not was I right to choose my art? But how can I honor my art without destroying myself? Not am I worthy? But how do I want to live?" They sat in silence again while Rebecca let those words sink in. The old man's wife came out with fresh coffee and homemade bread, and they ate together, watching the afternoon light change the colors of the distant mountains. "My grandson has feelings for you," the old man said eventually. "Strong feelings. But he's also terrified. He's terrified of loving someone who doesn't love themselves enough to stay safe, who treats their life like something that doesn't matter." "I'm trying to change that," Rebecca said, looking at Daniel. "I really am." "Trying isn't enough," the old man replied, his voice gentle but firm. "Change requires more than trying. It requires understanding why you do what you do, understanding the hole you're trying to fill with all that risk-taking and all those photographs." "What hole?" Rebecca asked, though part of her already knew the answer. "The one that says you're not enough. That you have to constantly prove and achieve and risk and push to deserve love and respect, to deserve taking up space in this world." The old man smiled sadly. I see it in young people all the time. This idea that they have to earn their worth through what they do instead of simply existing as they are. Rebecca started crying then. Really crying. The kind of tears that had been building up for years. Because he was right. She'd been trying to earn her worth for as long as she could remember. Earn it through good grades, through her art, through being the perfect daughter, the perfect wife, the perfect photographer. And when she couldn't be perfect, when her marriage fell apart, she decided she had to be extraordinary instead. Had to take risks no one else would take, get shots no one else could get. Had to prove that she was worth something, even if she couldn't be what her ex-husband wanted. Daniel moved closer, putting his arm around her, and she leaned into him, letting herself be held while she cried. The old man and his wife sat quietly, giving her space for her grief. When the tears finally stopped, Rebecca felt empty but also somehow lighter. Like she'd been carrying a weight she didn't even know was there, and crying had let some of it go. I was so angry at my ex-husband, she said quietly, for making me choose, for not accepting who I was, but I think I was really angry at myself, for not being able to be both things, for not being enough just as I was. And that's why you've been so reckless, Daniel said, understanding dawning in his voice. You've been punishing yourself, testing whether you even deserve to survive. Maybe. I don't know. I didn't think about it like that. I just thought I was being dedicated to my art. Rebecca wiped her eyes. But when I was trapped in that flood, when I thought I was going to die, I wasn't thinking about my portfolio or my career or proving anything. I was thinking about you, about how I'd betrayed your trust, about all the things we wouldn't get to do together if I died there. So what does that tell you? The old man asked. That people matter more than pictures. That connection matters more than achievement. That I've been measuring my worth by the wrong standards. She looked at Daniel, and that I don't want to die. I really don't. I want to live. And I want to figure out how to do that without all this self-destructive nonsense. That's a start, Daniel said. A good start. But knowing something and changing your behavior are two different things. How do I know you won't do the same thing again the next time an opportunity comes up for an amazing shot? It was a fair question. The hardest question, really. Because Rebecca had made promises before and broken them, had meant things sincerely in the moment, only to forget them when her photographer brain kicked in and all that mattered was the image. I don't know if I can give you guarantees, she admitted. I've spent 30 years building up these patterns. They're not going to disappear overnight just because I had a realization, but I can tell you that I'm scared. Really scared. Not just of dying, but of losing you, of losing this chance at something real. Fear isn't a strong enough foundation, Daniel said quietly. I don't want you to be careful because you're afraid. I want you to be careful because you genuinely value your life, because you believe you deserve to be safe and healthy and alive, regardless of what I think or feel. He's right, the old man interjected. If you're only changing for him, it won't last. You have to change for yourself, because you want a different life than the one you've been living. Rebecca thought about that. Did she want a different life? The old life, the one where her work was everything and nothing else mattered, was familiar. Safe in its own way. She knew how to be that person. But it was also lonely and hollow, and it had almost gotten her killed. I want a different life, she said slowly, testing out the words. I want to still do photography, still create art that matters. But I also want relationships, want to wake up next to someone I love. Want to have dinners with people I care about and conversations that matter and a life that's about more than just the next assignment or the next shot. Then that's what you work toward, the old man said. Not all at once. Not perfectly. Just one choice at a time, one day at a time. Choosing the life you want instead of the life you think you have to live to prove something. Daniel's grandfather insisted they stay for dinner. While his wife cooked, the old man told stories. Some were traditional Apache legends about the creation of the world and the spirits that lived in nature. Some were personal stories about Daniel growing up, which made Daniel groan and Rebecca laugh. The old truck rattled along the dusty road, kicking up clouds of red dirt behind it. Rebecca gripped the steering wheel tighter, her knuckles turning white. The GPS on her phone had stopped working miles ago, and now she was driving on pure hope, and the hand-drawn map the gas station attendant had sketched on a napkin. She'd been driving for 3 days straight, leaving behind her tiny apartment in Denver, her failed marriage, and a life that had crumbled around her like dried leaves. The divorce papers were still sitting in a box in the back of her truck, unsigned but final in every way that mattered. Her ex-husband's last words still echoed in her mind. "You love that camera more than you ever loved me." Maybe he was right. Maybe she did. Her camera had never let her down, never asked her to be someone she wasn't, never made her choose between her dreams and keeping the peace. It just saw the world through her eyes and captured what she wanted to remember. Havasu Falls had been on her bucket list for years. The photos she'd seen online looked almost fake, too beautiful to be real. Turquoise water cascading over red rocks, hidden deep in a remote corner of Arizona where most tourists never bothered to go. It was exactly the kind of place where she could disappear for a while, lose herself in her work, and maybe find some piece of herself she'd lost along the way. The hike down to the falls was brutal. Her backpack, loaded with camera equipment, felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. The trail twisted and turned, dropping deeper into the canyon with every step. Her legs burned, her lungs struggled with the thin air, but she kept going. This was what she did. She pushed through the hard parts to get to the beauty on the other side. When she finally reached the falls, the sight literally took her breath away. The water was even more stunning in person, that impossible shade of blue-green that didn't seem like it should exist in nature. The sound of the waterfall filled the air, a constant roar that somehow felt peaceful. She stood there for a long moment, just breathing it in, feeling something loosen in her chest that had been tight for months. She spent the first day just setting up her camp and recovering from the hike. That night, lying in her tent listening to the water, she slept better than she had in a year. The next morning she woke up before dawn, the way she always did when she was somewhere beautiful. The best light for photography happened in those early hours when the sun was just starting to paint the sky and everything had that soft golden glow. She grabbed her camera, pulled on her hiking boots and headed toward the falls. The mist from the waterfall created a natural fog that hung in the air, making everything look dreamlike and mysterious. Rebecca moved carefully over the wet rocks, finding the perfect angle, adjusting her lens, completely absorbed in what she was doing. This was when she felt most alive, most herself. When she had a camera in her hands, nothing else mattered. Not the divorce, not the loneliness, not the crushing feeling that she'd somehow failed at being a normal person with a normal life. She was lining up a shot of the water, catching the early morning light when she saw him. At first, she thought her eyes were playing tricks on her. Through the mist, standing on a rocky outcrop near the base of the falls, was a figure. A man, she realized, though the fog made him look almost like a spirit or a mirage. He stood completely still, facing the water, and there was something about the way he held himself that made her breath catch. His hair was long and dark, hanging past his shoulders. He wore what looked like traditional clothing, though from this distance and through the mist she couldn't make out the details, but it was the stillness of him that captured her attention. He wasn't posing or taking selfies like most visitors would be. He was just standing there, completely present, like he belonged to this place in a way she never could. Her photographer's instinct kicked in immediately. Her hands moved on autopilot, adjusting her camera settings, raising the lens, trying to focus through the mist and the distance. Her heart was pounding in a way that had nothing to do with the early morning hike. There was something about this moment, about this person, that felt important somehow, like the universe was showing her something she needed to see. She held her breath, waiting for the mist to clear just enough to get the shot. Her finger hovered over the shutter button. Just a few more seconds, and then he was gone. Not walking away, not climbing down from the rocks, just gone, like he'd dissolved into the mist itself. Rebecca blinked, lowered her camera and stared at the spot where he'd been standing. Had she imagined it? Was she so tired and emotionally drained that her mind was making up things? She walked, closer to where she'd seen him, her boots slipping on the wet rocks. When she reached the outcrop, there was no one there. No footprints in the mud, no sign that anyone had been standing there at all. The only sound was the roar of the falls and the beating of her own heart. Rebecca stood there for a long time, camera hanging around her neck, just staring at the water. She told herself it didn't matter, that she'd probably just seen another hiker who'd moved on. but she couldn't shake the image from her mind. The way he'd stood there, so still and sure. The way her heart had raced when she'd spotted him. The strange pull she'd felt, like an invisible string tugging at something deep inside her chest. She spent the rest of that day trying to focus on her photography, capturing the falls from every angle, playing with light and shadow and water. But her mind kept drifting back to that mysterious figure in the mist. Who was he? Why had he been there at dawn? And why couldn't she stop thinking about him? That night, lying in her tent again, Rebecca couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw him standing by the falls. She told herself she was being ridiculous. She'd come here to escape, to heal, to be alone with her camera and her thoughts. The last thing she needed was to become obsessed with some stranger she'd glimpsed for 30 seconds through the fog. But as she finally drifted off to sleep, listening to the eternal sound of the waterfall, she knew one thing for certain. Tomorrow, she'd be back at those falls at dawn. And maybe, just maybe, he would be too. 3 days had passed since Rebecca first saw the mysterious figure by the falls. 3 days of waking up at dawn, grabbing her camera and rushing to that same spot hoping to catch another glimpse of him. But each morning brought only mist and water and the lonely beauty of the canyon. She'd started to feel foolish. Here she was, supposedly taking time to heal and focus on her work, and instead she was chasing ghosts through the fog. Maybe her ex-husband had been right about more than just the camera. Maybe she really was terrible at knowing what she wanted. On the 4th morning, she decided to explore a different area. There was a trail that led up along the canyon rim, and she'd heard from other campers that the view from up there was incredible. It would be good to change her routine, to stop obsessing over something that probably didn't even matter. The trail was narrower than she expected, hugging the cliff face as it climbed higher and higher. On one side was solid rock, on the other, a steep drop that made her stomach flip when she looked down. But the photographer in her couldn't resist. The morning light was hitting the canyon walls in the most beautiful way, making the red rocks glow like they were lit from within. She stopped at a wider section of the trail, setting her backpack down carefully. She pulled out her camera and moved closer to the edge, trying to frame the perfect shot of the falls far below, just a little closer. The light was perfect. The angle was almost right. She leaned out just a bit more. The rock beneath her foot gave way without warning. 1 second she was standing solid. The next she was falling, tumbling sideways toward the edge. Her camera flew from her hands. She saw the sky spinning, then the canyon, then the sky again. Her fingers clawed at the rocky trail, finding nothing but loose gravel and air. This is it, she thought. This is how it ends. Then strong hands caught her wrist. The grip was iron tight, stopping her slide with a jolt that made her shoulder scream in pain. For a terrifying moment she dangled there, half over the edge, held only by those hands wrapped around her wrist. Then she was being pulled, dragged back from the drop, hauled onto solid ground with a strength that seemed impossible. She landed hard on the trail, gasping, her whole body shaking. For a few seconds all she could do was lie there, feeling the solid rock beneath her, grateful to be alive. Her heart hammered so hard she thought it might burst out of her chest. "Are you okay?" The voice was deep, concerned and slightly out of breath. Rebecca looked up and her breath caught for the second time in as many minutes. It was him, the man from the falls. Up close she could see details the mist had hidden before. He was younger than she'd thought, maybe early 30s, with deep brown eyes that showed both worry and something else she couldn't quite name. His long dark hair was pulled back and he wore a park ranger uniform that somehow looked both official and out of place on him at the same time. Yes, I think so." Her voice came out shaky. She tried to sit up and winced. Everything hurt, but nothing seemed broken. "You saved my life. You shouldn't be that close to the edge. Especially not alone." There was a sternness in his voice, but his hands were gentle as he helped her sit up fully. "Those rocks are loose this time of year. The winter rains weaken them, I know. I should have known." "I wasn't thinking." Rebecca looked around frantically. "My camera. Did you see where it went?" He reached behind him and held it up. Somehow, impossibly, he'd managed to catch both her and her camera. The strap was tangled around his arm. "This is what you were worried about? You almost died. That camera is my life." The words came out before she could stop them, and she immediately heard how they sounded, how familiar they were. How many times had her ex-husband heard her say something similar? The ranger studied her for a long moment, his dark eyes seeing too much. A camera is just a tool. Your life is your life. He handed it to her carefully. No cracks in the lens, by the way. You got lucky. Thank you. Really. I don't know how to thank you enough. Rebecca checked the camera automatically, her hands still trembling. He was right, no damage. Another miracle. I'm Rebecca, by the way. Rebecca Chen, Daniel Big A. He offered his hand and she took it. His grip was warm and calloused, the hand of someone who worked outdoors. I'm a ranger here, and I've been watching you the past few days. Her eyebrows shot up. Watching me? Not in a creepy way, he added quickly, and for the first time she saw him look slightly embarrassed. It's my job to keep an eye on visitors, especially solo hikers. I saw you that first morning by the falls. You were so focused on your camera, you almost walked right off the rocks into the water. I was about to call out to you, but then you moved back on your own. So he had been there. She hadn't imagined it. I saw you too, through the mist, but then you were gone. I had to check on another area. Flash flood warning came through on my radio. He picked up her backpack, testing its weight. You carry a lot of equipment for someone hiking alone in a canyon. Photography is what I do. It's why I'm here. She took the backpack from him, but her arms were still shaking so badly she almost dropped it. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving her feeling weak and shaky. Daniel took the backpack back without comment. Come on, there's a safer spot about 10 minutes up the trail. Flatter ground, good views. You can rest there. Make sure you're really okay. She wanted to argue, to say she was fine, that she didn't need help. But the truth was her legs felt like jelly and her hands wouldn't stop trembling. Okay, thank you. They walked in silence for a while, Daniel leading the way with sure, confident steps. He moved like someone who knew every rock, every turn, every dangerous spot on this trail. Like this place was part of him. So you're Apache? Rebecca asked, then immediately felt stupid for asking. Sorry, that was probably rude. White Mountain Apache, he confirmed, not seeming offended. My family has lived in this area for generations, long before it became a tourist destination. It must be strange having strangers come through all the time, taking pictures of places that are sacred to you. He glanced back at her, surprised. Most tourists don't think about that. I'm not most tourists. The words came out more defensive than she'd meant them to. I mean, I try to be respectful. Photography isn't just about taking pretty pictures, at least not for me. It's about understanding a place, really seeing it. And do you really see this place? There was a challenge in his voice, but also genuine curiosity. Rebecca thought about that as they climbed higher. Did she really see this place? Or was she just using it as a backdrop for her own pain, her own need to escape? Before she could answer, they reached the flat area Daniel had mentioned. He was right. The view was incredible. From here she could see the entire canyon spread out below. The falls just a white ribbon in the distance. The morning sun was fully up now, painting everything in shades of gold and red and that impossible turquoise blue of the water. Daniel set down her backpack and pulled out a water bottle from his own pack, handing it to her. Drink. You're probably more shaken up than you realize. She drank, grateful for the cold water, for the chance to sit down, for the stranger's unexpected kindness. Why are you being so nice to me? I was careless. I could have gotten myself killed. Everyone makes mistakes, he said quietly, and I'm a ranger. Keeping people safe is literally my job. But there was something in his voice that suggested it was more than that. They sat there in comfortable silence for a while, looking out over the canyon. Rebecca found herself studying him when she thought he wasn't looking. There was something about him that made her curious in a way she hadn't been curious about another person in a very long time. Maybe it was the way he moved so at home in this wild place. Maybe it was the kindness in his eyes, even when he was scolding her for being reckless. Or maybe it was just that her hand still tingled where he'd caught her wrist, pulling her back from the edge, saving her life. The falls, Daniel said suddenly. If you want to photograph them properly, I could show you some spots. Places the regular tourists don't know about. Rebecca looked at him surprised. Really, you do that? You almost died trying to get a good shot. I figure I should at least point you toward safer places with better views. He smiled for the first time, and it transformed his whole face. Besides, if I don't, you'll probably just keep climbing around on loose rocks until you actually fall." She laughed, and it felt good. It felt like the first real laugh she'd had in months. "You're probably right about that. Tomorrow morning, Dawn. Meet me by the main pool below the falls. Wear better hiking boots than those." He nodded at her worn sneakers. "And bring less equipment. You don't need to carry your whole studio into a canyon." "It's a deal." Rebecca held out her hand and they shook on it. His hand was warm and steady, and she found herself not wanting to let go. As Daniel helped her gather her things and guided her back down to the safer main trail, Rebecca realized something had shifted. She'd come to this canyon to be alone, to hide from the world and her failures. But maybe, just maybe, she'd found something she hadn't been looking for. Someone who saw her not as too much or too little, but as exactly who she was. Reckless, passionate, and worth saving. Tomorrow couldn't come fast enough. Rebecca was already waiting by the main pool when Daniel arrived the next morning. She'd barely slept. Too excited and nervous about spending the day with him. She'd changed outfits 3 times before feeling ridiculous about it. This wasn't a date. He was just being nice, showing a clumsy tourist around so she wouldn't kill herself. But when he smiled at her in the early morning light, something in her chest did a little flip that had nothing to do with photography or scenic views. "You're early," he said, looking pleased. "Most people I make plans with show up late. If they show up at all." "I'm always early when it comes to good light," Rebecca replied, holding up her camera. She'd taken his advice and brought only 1 camera body and 2 lenses instead of her usual arsenal. And supposedly a good guide. Supposedly? He raised an eyebrow. "Come on. Let me prove myself." He led her away from the main trail, down a path so narrow and hidden she would have walked right past it. They climbed over rocks, ducked under fallen trees, and squeezed through tight spaces between boulders. It was more adventure than hike, and Rebecca found herself laughing as they scrambled up a particularly tricky section. "You weren't kidding about the better boots," she called up to him. "These are definitely an improvement." "I noticed," Daniel said, reaching down to give her a hand up. "Though I half expected you to show up in those same sneakers out of stubbornness." "I'm stubborn, not stupid." "Well, mostly not stupid." She thought about yesterday's near fall and winced. Recent evidence may contradict that statement. When they finally emerged from the narrow passage, Rebecca gasped. They were standing on a hidden ledge that looked directly across at the falls from an angle she'd never seen in any photograph. The water caught the morning sun and seemed to glow from within. Mist created rainbows that danced in the air. It was absolutely perfect. "Daniel, this is... I don't even have words." She was already lifting her camera, her practiced eye finding compositions, reading the light. "How did you find this place?" "My grandfather showed me when I was 8 years old. He used to bring me out here to teach me about our connection to this land." Daniel sat down on a smooth boulder, watching her work. "This area is sacred to our people. The water spirits live here according to the old stories. My grandfather made me promise to protect this place." Rebecca lowered her camera, suddenly aware that she might be intruding on something private. "Should I not photograph it?" "I don't want to disrespect—" "No, it's okay. I think my grandfather would have liked you. He always said the best way to protect something is to help people understand why it matters. Your photographs, they're not just pretty pictures, are they? You're trying to show people what you see, what you feel." "That's exactly it." Rebecca sat down next to him, forgetting about her camera for a moment. "When I look through a lens, I'm not just capturing light and shadow. I'm trying to capture the truth of a place. The feeling of being there. Does that make sense?" "More sense than you know." Daniel picked up a smooth pebble, turning it over in his hands. "That's what I'm trying to do too, in a different way. I work for the Park Service, following their rules and regulations. But I'm also trying to honor my heritage, to be a bridge between the modern world and the old ways. Some days I feel like I'm doing neither one right." "I understand that feeling." Rebecca thought about her divorce, about all the ways she'd failed to be what her ex-husband wanted, while also feeling like she was failing at being who she wanted to be. Trying to live in 2 worlds at once, never quite fitting in either one. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, just listening to the roar of the falls. Then Daniel started talking, really talking, in a way that made Rebecca think he didn't do this often. He told her about growing up on the reservation, about the tension between preserving traditions and adapting to a changing world. He talked about his grandfather, a respected elder who knew all the old stories and ceremonies, and about his parents who wanted him to get a college education and a stable government job. My grandfather used to bring me out here before dawn, Daniel said, his voice soft with memory. He'd tell me stories about how the world was created, about the spirits that live in the water and the rocks and the trees. Then I'd go to school and learn about geology and erosion and water cycles. Both things are true, you know? The scientific explanations and the spiritual ones, they're just different ways of understanding the same mystery. Rebecca found herself leaning closer, drawn in by his words. That's beautiful. The idea that there's room for both. Not everyone sees it that way. Some of the elders think I've sold out by working for the Park Service. Some of my coworkers think I'm too superstitious, too tied to old ways. He looked at her directly, but when I'm out here in these places my ancestors knew, doing work that protects this land, I feel like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. I envy that, Rebecca admitted. I've never felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. I always feel like I'm either too much or not enough. Too obsessed with my work or not successful enough at it, too independent or too needy. My ex-husband, he wanted me to be different. More traditional, I guess. Someone who wanted a normal life with normal goals. And you gave him what he wanted? Daniel asked. I tried. For 5 years, I really tried. I took fewer assignments, stayed home more, tried to care about the things he cared about, dinner parties and career advancement and keeping up with the neighbors. Rebecca laughed, but it sounded bitter even to her own ears. But I was miserable. And eventually, he saw through it. He said I was always somewhere else in my head even when I was sitting right next to him. He wasn't wrong. Sounds like you weren't right for each other. That's not the same as you being wrong. The simple way he said it made Rebecca's eyes sting with unexpected tears. I wish I'd understood that before I wasted 5 years of both our lives. Nothing's wasted if you learned something. Daniel stood up, offering her his hand. Come on. There's another spot I want to show you. And you're going to need your camera for this one. Over the next several hours, Daniel led her to places she never would have found on her own. Hidden pools that reflected the sky like mirrors. Narrow slot canyons where the light filtered down in shafts of gold. Ancient rock art left by people who had lived here hundreds of years ago. Handprints and spirals and figures that seemed to dance across the stone. At each place, he told her stories. Some were legends his grandfather had taught him. Stories about how the land was formed and why the water ran turquoise, and where the spirits liked to gather. Some were personal memories, moments from his childhood that had shaped who he'd become. And some were observations about the land itself. The kind of deep knowledge that only comes from spending years really paying attention. Rebecca photographed everything, but she found herself putting the camera down more and more often, just listening. There was something in the way Daniel talked about this place that went beyond words. It was love, yes, but also responsibility. A deep sense of belonging and duty all mixed together. My grandfather always said that we don't own this land, Daniel explained as they sat on a rock ledge eating the lunch he'd packed. We're just taking care of it for the generations that come after us. Everything we do, every decision we make, we have to think about how it will affect people we'll never meet. People who aren't even born yet. That's a heavy responsibility, Rebecca said. It is. But it's also freeing in a way. When you know you're part of something bigger than yourself, something that stretches back into the past and forward into the future, your own problems seem smaller, more manageable. Rebecca thought about that. She'd spent so much time focused on her own pain, her own failure, her own need to prove something. When was the last time she'd thought about anything bigger than her own feelings? As if reading her mind, Daniel asked, "What about you? What are you trying to prove by being out here?" The question caught her off guard. She started to give an easy answer. Something about needing a change of scenery or wanting to capture beautiful images. But something about the way Daniel was looking at her, patient and genuinely interested, made her want to be honest. "I'm trying to prove I made the right choice," she admitted. "Choosing my work over my marriage. Choosing to be alone rather than pretend to be someone I'm not. But mostly, I think I'm trying to prove that I'm worth something on my own, that my art matters, that I matter even without someone else to validate me." Daniel nodded slowly. "And has it worked? Being out here alone? I thought it would. But honestly?" Rebecca looked out over the canyon at all that wild beauty. "I've just been running, taking bigger risks, going to more remote places, pushing harder. Like if I can just get the perfect shot, capture the perfect moment, then everything will make sense. Then I'll finally feel like I'm enough. You know that's not how it works, right?" Daniel's voice was gentle, not judgmental. "You can't find yourself by running away. And you definitely can't prove your worth by risking your life for a photograph, says the guy who literally saved me from falling off a cliff yesterday. Exactly. I saved you because your life has value, whether you get the perfect shot or not, whether you're married or single, successful or struggling, confident or lost. He looked at her intently. The camera doesn't define you. Rebecca woke up with the sun streaming through her tent and a feeling of pure happiness she hadn't experienced in years. For a moment, she just lay there, listening to the sound of the falls in the distance, thinking about Daniel and the past 3 days they'd spent exploring together. He'd shown her corners of the canyon that felt like secrets whispered just for her. They'd talked for hours about everything and nothing, and somewhere along the way, without her quite noticing when it happened, she'd started falling for him. The realization should have scared her. She'd just gotten out of a failed marriage. The last thing she needed was to get tangled up with someone new, especially someone who lived in a completely different world than hers. But when she was with Daniel, none of that seemed to matter. She was packing her camera bag for another day of exploring when she heard voices outside her tent. 2 women were talking as they walked past, and something in their conversation made her pause. "I still can't believe he's willing to guide tourists again," one woman was saying. "After what happened with his wife, I thought he'd never." "It's been 5 years, Linda. Maybe he's finally ready to move on. God knows he's punished himself long enough. That photographer, though, that poor woman, such a tragedy. And right here, in this very canyon." Their voices faded as they moved away, but Rebecca sat frozen, her camera forgotten in her hands. His wife? Daniel had been married? And something had happened to her. Something bad enough that these strangers were still talking about it 5 years later. She told herself it was none of her business. Everyone had a past, including her. She of all people should understand that. But the words kept echoing in her head. That photographer. His wife had been a photographer too. That evening, Daniel was quieter than usual as they hiked back from their day's adventure. Rebecca caught him looking at her several times with an expression she couldn't quite read. Sadness, maybe, or fear, or something in between. "Is everything okay?" she finally asked as they reached her campsite. "Yeah. No. I don't know." Daniel ran a hand through his hair. A gesture she'd learned meant he was stressed. "Can we talk? Really talk?" "Of course." Rebecca's heart started beating faster. She'd been wondering all day if she should mention what she'd overheard, and now it seemed like she wouldn't have to. They sat on a fallen log near her tent, watching the last light fade from the sky. For a long moment, Daniel just stared at his hands, seeming to struggle with where to begin. "I haven't been completely honest with you," he finally said. "Not lying exactly, but not telling you everything either. And you deserve to know before this goes any further." "Before what goes any further?" Rebecca asked, even though she knew exactly what he meant. "This, us, whatever this is becoming." He looked at her directly, and she saw pain in his eyes. Old pain that hadn't fully healed. "I was married before. Her name was Jennifer. She was a photographer like you." Rebecca felt something cold settle in her stomach. "What happened?" "She died. 5 years ago. Right here, in this canyon." Daniel's voice was flat, emotionless, like he'd told this story so many times it had stopped feeling real. There was a flash flood warning. Everyone was supposed to evacuate. But Jennifer wanted to photograph the storm, wanted to capture the water rushing through the narrow canyons. She thought she had time. Oh, Daniel. Rebecca reached for his hand without thinking, and he gripped it like a lifeline. "I begged her not to go, told her it was too dangerous, that no photograph was worth her life. But she was so sure she could do it, so confident. She said I worried too much, that she knew what she was doing." He laughed, but there was no humor in it. She was wrong. "You don't have to tell me this if it's too hard," Rebecca said softly, even though part of her desperately wanted to hear the rest. "No, you need to know. Because when I look at you, when I see you taking risks to get the perfect shot, climbing on loose rocks and leaning over edges, I see her, and it terrifies me." His grip on her hand tightened. "I found her body 3 days later, wedged between rocks in a slot canyon. The water had receded by then, but the damage was done. She'd drowned trying to save her camera. She was still holding it when we found her. Rebecca felt tears running down her face, though she wasn't sure if they were for Daniel's loss or for a woman she'd never met, or for the terrible unfairness of it all. For 5 years I blamed myself, Daniel continued. If I'd tried harder to stop her, if I'd hidden her equipment, if I'd physically prevented her from going out that day, the guilt ate me alive. I couldn't even look at a camera without feeling sick. That's part of why I became a ranger here. I thought if I could keep other people safe, if I could prevent anyone else from making the same mistake, maybe I could make up for failing to save her. It wasn't your fault, Rebecca said firmly. She made her own choice. You can't control other people, even people you love, especially people you love. I know that. Up here, he tapped his head. But in here, he put his hand over his heart. I still feel responsible. And then you showed up and you're so much like her in some ways, talented, passionate, completely dedicated to your art, willing to risk everything for the perfect shot. Is that why you've been spending time with me? To make sure I don't get myself killed? The question came out more bitter than Rebecca intended. At first, maybe, yes. Daniel turned to face her fully. But then I got to know you, and I realized you're not Jennifer. You're different in important ways. You listen when I warn you about dangers. You're willing to learn. And more than that, you see me. Not just as a guide or a ranger, but as a person. Because you are a person, Daniel. A good person who went through something horrible and is trying his best to heal from it. That's just it, though. I don't know if I am healing, or if I'm just repeating the same pattern, falling for another photographer who might. He couldn't finish the sentence. Rebecca thought about the past few days, about all the small ways Daniel had been protective of her, making sure she wore proper boots, checking that she had enough water, steering her away from unstable ground. She'd thought he was just being thoughtful, but now she understood. He was trying to prevent history from repeating itself. I'm scared, Daniel admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. I'm terrified that I'm going to lose you too. That you'll take one risk too many, chase one shot too far, and I'll have to watch someone I care about die again. I can't go through that twice, Rebecca. I can't. Then what do we do? Rebecca asked. Because I care about you too. More than I probably should, given that we've only known each other a week. But I can't change who I am. Photography isn't just my job. It's how I make sense of the world. I'm not asking you to change. I would never ask that. Daniel stood up, pacing now, agitated. Jennifer's death wasn't about her being a photographer. It was about her not respecting the danger, about her thinking she was invincible. And when I tried to warn her, she acted like I was trying to control her, like I didn't respect her work. And you're afraid I'm the same way. I'm afraid of caring about someone who doesn't care about their own safety. He stopped pacing and looked at her. Yesterday, when you almost fell off that cliff, when I caught you just in time, do you know what I felt? Terror. Absolute terror. And then you asked about your camera. Not about whether you were hurt, not about how close you came to dying. Your camera. Rebecca flinched like he'd slapped her. Because he was right. She had asked about her camera first. Just like his wife had died holding hers. I'm sorry, she said quietly. You're right. I've been reckless. Not just here, but for months. Maybe years. I've been so focused on proving something, on running away from my failed marriage and my feelings of worthlessness, that I stopped caring about my own life. Why? Daniel sat back down next to her. Why would you do that? Because if I'm not a good photographer, then what am I? The words burst out of her, raw and honest. My marriage failed. I don't have kids. I'm not close with my family. Photography is all I have. And if I can't even do that well enough to matter, if I can't take risks and get shots that other people can't, then what's the point of any of it? The point is living, Daniel said intensely. The point is being here, breathing, experiencing things, creating art because it brings you joy, not because you're trying to prove you're worthy of existing. They sat in silence as darkness fell completely around them. The stars came out one by one, more stars than Rebecca had ever seen in her light-polluted city life. The falls roared in the distance, eternal and indifferent to human drama. "I don't know if I can be what you need," Rebecca finally said. "I want to. God, I want to. But I've spent so long being one way, I don't know if I can change." "I'm not asking you to change who you are. I'm asking you to value your own life, to take reasonable precautions, to understand that there are people who would be devastated if something happened to you." He took her hand again. "I would be devastated. And we've only known each other a week. Imagine how much worse it would be after a month or a year or 10 years. You're already thinking about 10 years? Rebecca tried to smile, but it wobbled. "I'm thinking about tomorrow. And the day after that. And all the days I want to have with you. If you'll let me. But I can't do that if I'm constantly terrified you're going to get yourself killed chasing the perfect shot." The morning sky looked angry. Dark clouds were rolling in from the west, and the air had that electric feeling that comes before a big storm. Rebecca stood outside her tent, watching the clouds build, and felt something stirring in her chest. Not fear exactly. Excitement. Daniel had warned her the night before that bad weather was coming. The Park Service was issuing evacuation orders for the canyon. Everyone needed to be out by noon. He'd offered to help her pack up her camp and hike out with her, but she'd assured him she'd be fine on her own. He had other campers to check on, people who needed his help more than she did. What she hadn't told him was that she'd been thinking about the storm all night. About the way the light would look with those dark clouds, about how the falls would rage with all that extra water, about the photographs she could get that no one else would have because no one else would be crazy enough to stay. She knew what she was thinking was wrong. She'd promised Daniel just 2 days ago that she'd be more careful, that she'd value her own safety, and she meant it. She really did. But this was different. This was a once-in-a-lifetime shot. The kind of image that could define a career. The kind of thing Jennifer would have done, a small voice whispered in her head. Rebecca pushed the thought away. She wasn't Jennifer. She would be careful. She'd just get a few shots and then hike out before the storm really hit. She had plenty of time. By 9 in the morning, the canyon was almost empty. She watched the last groups of tourists trudge up the trail with their backpacks heading to safety. The rangers were doing final sweeps, making sure everyone was out. She'd hidden her tent in a cluster of rocks where it wouldn't be easily visible. As far as anyone knew, she'd already left. The first drops of rain started falling around 10. Rebecca was in position by then, her camera protected under a waterproof cover, waiting for the perfect moment. The light was incredible. Shafts of sun breaking through the storm clouds, hitting the falls at just the right angle. The water was already starting to run higher, faster, more violent than she'd ever seen it. She took shot after shot, completely absorbed in her work. This was why she did what she did. This feeling of capturing something raw and powerful and true. The rest of the world faded away until there was only her camera, and the storm. The rain got heavier. The wind picked up. Rebecca moved closer to the falls, trying to get a better angle. The rocks were slippery now, but she was careful. She tested each foothold before putting her weight on it. She was being safe. She was being smart. Thunder cracked overhead so loud it made her jump. She should probably head back now, she thought. Get her gear, break camp, hike out. But the storm was just getting started, and the best shots were yet to come. Just a few more minutes, that's when she heard it. A sound like a freight train coming from up canyon. She turned to look, and her blood went cold. A wall of water was rushing down the narrow slot canyon, carrying rocks and branches and everything in its path. A flash flood, bigger and faster than anything she'd imagined. She ran, dropped her camera and ran, scrambling up the nearest rocks, trying to get to higher ground. But the flood was faster. The water hit her like a physical blow, knocking her off her feet, sweeping her legs out from under her. She went under, the current tumbling her like a rag doll. She couldn't tell which way was up. Her head broke the surface, and she gasped for air, only to be pulled under again. She hit a rock hard, pain exploding in her shoulder. She grabbed for anything, her fingers finding a branch, holding on with desperate strength as the water tried to tear her away. She managed to pull herself up onto a narrow ledge, wedged between two boulders. The water was rising fast, already up to her waist. She was trapped. There was nowhere higher to climb, and the water kept coming. This is it, she thought. This is how I die, just like Jennifer. Daniel was right. I was reckless. I was stupid. And now I'm going to die alone in this canyon because I couldn't let go of getting the perfect shot. She thought about Daniel finding her body, thought about him having to go through that loss again, thought about how she'd promised him she'd be more careful, and then broken that promise the first chance she got. Hot tears mixed with the cold rain on her face. Rebecca! At first she thought she was imagining it. But then she heard it again, closer this time. Rebecca!
Where are you? Here!
She screamed, her voice barely audible over the roar of the water. I'm here! She saw him then, Daniel, moving along the canyon rim with a rope looking for her. Their eyes met across the churning water. The relief on his face lasted only a second before it was replaced by fear and determination. Hold on, he shouted. Don't let go. I won't. But even as she said it, she could feel her grip weakening. The cold was making her fingers numb. The water was getting higher. She wasn't sure how much longer she could hold on. Daniel was moving now with a speed and sureness that took her breath away. He secured the rope to a solid rock formation, then started descending toward her, moving from rock to rock like it was something he'd done 1,000 times. Maybe he had. You're going to have to trust me, he called when he got closer. When I say let go, you let go of that branch and reach for me. Okay? The water's too strong. I know. That's why you have to time it right. I'll count to 3. On 3, you let go and push toward me. I'll catch you. What if you don't? I will. There was absolute certainty in his voice. I will catch you, Rebecca. I promise. She wanted to believe him. But she was so cold, so tired, so scared. Now, Daniel shouted. 1, 2, 3. Rebecca let go. The water immediately grabbed her, pulling her downstream. But Daniel's hand shot out, catching her wrist with that same iron grip from when he'd saved her on the trail. He hauled her toward him, fighting against the current, his face twisted with effort. She crashed into him, and he wrapped his arms around her, holding her against his chest as the water raged around them. For a moment, they just clung to each other, both breathing hard. I've got you, he said into her ear. I've got you. You're okay. I'm sorry, she sobbed. I'm so sorry. You were right. I was stupid and reckless, and save it. We need to get out of here first. He tied the rope around both of them, securing them together. This next part is going to be hard. We have to climb up to that ledge, and the rocks are slick. Can you do it? I don't know. Yes, you do. You're stronger than you think. He looked at her intently. I need you to hold on to me and climb. Can you do that for me, for us? She nodded, not trusting her voice. The climb was a nightmare. Every muscle in Rebecca's body screamed in protest. Her shoulder throbbed where she'd hit the rock. Her fingers kept slipping on the wet stone. But Daniel was there every step of the way, guiding her hands and feet, supporting her weight when she faltered, never once letting her fall. When they finally reached solid ground, Rebecca collapsed. She was shaking so hard her teeth chattered. Daniel immediately stripped off his ranger jacket and wrapped it around her, then pulled her close, sharing his body heat. Stay with me, he said urgently. You're going into shock. I need you to stay awake, okay? Talk to me. Tell me something, anything. My camera, she managed through chattering teeth. I dropped it. I don't care about the camera. His voice was rough, almost angry. Do you understand me? I don't care about the camera. I care about you. Only you. I know. I'm sorry. She was crying again, though she wasn't sure she had any tears left. You came for me, even after I promised to be careful and then wasn't. Even after everything. You came. Of course I came. Did you think I wouldn't? He pulled her closer, and she could hear his heart hammering in his chest. When I couldn't find you with the other evacuees, when I realized you'd stayed behind, I've never been so terrified in my life. Not even when Jennifer... I thought I'd lost you before I even really found you. They sat there in the rain, holding each other as the storm raged around them. Eventually, Daniel got them moving again. They had to get to shelter, get Rebecca warm and dry, make sure she didn't have any serious injuries. But for those few minutes, they just held on to each other like lifelines in a storm. When they finally made it back to the ranger station, Daniel's supervisor was there, waiting. His face was grim. Be gay. My office now. Daniel helped Rebecca inside first, wrapped her in blankets, made sure the other ranger on duty was checking her for injuries. Then he went to face the consequences of leaving his post to save her. Through the office window, Rebecca could see them arguing. Could see Daniel's supervisor getting red in the face, pointing his finger, clearly furious. Could see Daniel standing there, taking it, his face impassive. She'd done this to him. Put his job at risk, made him relive his worst nightmare. All because she couldn't resist chasing one more shot. When Daniel finally came out, he looked exhausted. He sat down next to her, not quite meeting her eyes. "Are you in trouble?" she asked quietly. "Suspended for 2 weeks. Without pay." He rubbed his face. "I left my assigned area during an emergency evacuation. Protocol says I should have radioed for backup instead of going in alone. I'm so sorry. This is all my fault." "Yeah," he said simply. "It is." The words hurt, but she deserved them. "She deserved worse, but I'd do it again," Daniel continued, finally looking at her. 100 times over. I'd risk my job, my safety, everything. 2 weeks had passed since the flood, and Rebecca was still in Arizona. She'd originally planned to stay only a week, but that plan had gone out the window along with so many other things. Her small motel room had become a temporary home, and she'd started having regular video calls with a therapist back in Denver, who specialized in anxiety and self-worth issues. The sessions were hard, really hard. The therapist kept asking questions that made Rebecca uncomfortable, like, "When did you first learn that you had to earn love? And what would happen if you just existed without achieving anything?" But they were also helping. Slowly, she was starting to understand the patterns she'd built up over a lifetime. Daniel had been patient during these 2 weeks, giving her space to work on herself while also being there when she needed support. His suspension from work had ended, and he was back to his ranger duties. They spent their evenings together, talking and learning about each other in deeper ways. No more rushing, no more intensity driven by fear and adrenaline. Just two people getting to know each other properly. One evening, Daniel showed up at her motel with an unusual expression on his face. Nervous, maybe, or excited. Rebecca couldn't quite tell. "I talked to my grandfather," he said, "about you, about us, and he wants to invite you to something special." "What kind of something?" "A ceremony. At his home. It's a private gathering, not usually open to outsiders, but he specifically asked for you to be there." Daniel sat down on the edge of her bed. "I should warn you, though, it's important, sacred, and it means a lot that he's inviting you. My grandfather doesn't extend these invitations lightly." Rebecca felt a flutter of nervousness in her stomach. "What kind of ceremony?" "It's a healing ceremony, actually. A blessing for new beginnings. My grandfather holds them a few times a year for family members who are going through transitions, starting new jobs, getting married, recovering from illness, that kind of thing." He took her hand. "He thinks we both need it. You to mark this new path you're on, and me to finally let go of the guilt I've been carrying. Are you sure it's okay for me to be there?" "I'm not family. I'm not even Apache. My grandfather says the spirits don't care about bloodlines. They care about intentions and hearts, and he sees something in you worth honoring." Daniel squeezed her hand. "Will you come? It would mean a lot to me. To both of us." "Of course I'll come," Rebecca said without hesitation. "I'm honored to be invited." The ceremony was scheduled for the following Saturday at sunset. Daniel picked her up early that afternoon and drove her out to his grandfather's house. There were already several cars parked outside, family members arriving for the gathering. Inside, the small house had been transformed. The furniture had been pushed back to create an open space in the center of the living room. A circle had been marked on the floor with what looked like cornmeal. Sage bundles and other herbs hung from the ceiling, filling the air with a rich, earthy scent. Daniel's grandfather sat in the place of honor, wearing traditional ceremonial clothing that was clearly old and carefully preserved. Rebecca was introduced to various aunts, uncles, cousins, and family friends. Everyone was warm and welcoming, though she could feel them studying her, curious about this outsider who'd captured Daniel's attention. One particularly sharp-eyed older woman, Daniel's aunt, pulled her aside. "So you're the photographer who almost got herself killed," the aunt said bluntly. Daniel told us what happened. "Yes, ma'am. That was me." Rebecca wasn't sure what else to say. "My nephew has been through enough heartache. If you're going to be in his life, you need to take care of yourself. We can't watch him go through that kind of loss again." The aunt's voice was stern, but her eyes were kind. "You understand?" "I do. And I'm working on it. Really working on it, not just saying the words." The aunt studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Good. Daniel deserves someone who values themselves as much as he values them. Don't forget that." As the sun began to set, everyone gathered in the living room. Daniel's grandfather stood in the center of the circle and began to speak. He spoke partly in Apache and partly in English, his voice strong and resonant despite his age. He talked about the cycle of seasons, about how everything in nature goes through periods of death and rebirth, about how humans are no different, how we all have moments where the old version of ourselves has to die so a new version can emerge. "We gather tonight to honor transitions," he said, "to honor those who are brave enough to change, to grow, to become something new. Change is the hardest thing humans do. It's easier to stay the same, even when staying the same hurts us. But some people find the courage to transform. Those people deserve to be witnessed and supported." He called Daniel forward first. Daniel stepped into the circle, and his grandfather placed his hands on his grandson's shoulders. "5 years ago, you lost someone you loved, and you've been punishing yourself ever since, trying to save everyone else to make up for the one person you couldn't save." The old man's voice was gentle but firm. "But your wife made her own choice. You couldn't have stopped her no matter how hard you tried. It's time to forgive yourself. Time to allow yourself to love again without fear. Time to understand that loving someone doesn't mean controlling them or keeping them safe from every danger. It means walking beside them, trusting them to make their own choices and being there when they need support." Daniel's eyes were wet with tears. His grandfather continued speaking in Apache, words Rebecca couldn't understand but could feel the weight of. Other family members joined in, adding their own prayers and blessings. When it was done, Daniel stepped back out of the circle, wiping his eyes, looking somehow lighter than he had before. Then the old man looked at Rebecca. "Come forward, child." Rebecca's heart pounded as she stepped into the circle. She felt exposed, vulnerable, with all these people watching her, but she also felt safe somehow, held by the ceremony and the intentions of everyone present. "You came to our land running from something," Daniel's grandfather said. "Running from failure, from guilt, from the feeling that you weren't enough. You were so busy running that you almost ran right off a cliff, but the spirits had other plans for you. They brought you to my grandson and through him to us. To this moment." He placed his hands on her shoulders, and Rebecca felt warmth radiating from his palms. "You are enough, just as you are. Not because of what you create or achieve, not because of the risks you take or the beauty you capture, but because you exist, because you are a living being with value and purpose and a place in this world." His voice grew stronger. "The camera is not your enemy. It's not the thing that destroyed your marriage or makes you reckless. It's a tool for seeing truth. The question is, are you brave enough to see the truth about yourself, to see that you are worthy of love and care and safety, to see that you deserve to live fully, not just survive?" Rebecca couldn't stop the tears now. They poured down her face as something inside her cracked open. Some wall she'd been building her entire life, some defense against believing she was inherently valuable, finally crumbled. "I want to be brave enough," she whispered. "I want to believe I'm worthy." "Then believe it," the old man said simply. "Choose to believe it. Every day, every moment, choose to see yourself the way the spirits see you, as precious, as irreplaceable, as enough." He spoke more words in Apache, and again the family joined in. But this time Rebecca felt like she understood somehow, even though she didn't know the language. She felt the blessing washing over her, felt something shifting deep in her chest, felt the possibility of truly changing, not just trying to change. When she stepped out of the circle, Daniel was there pulling her into his arms. She buried her face in his shoulder and cried, releasing years of pain and shame and self-hatred. He held her through it, not trying to fix it or stop it, just being there. After the ceremony, there was food and laughter and music. Daniel's cousins brought out a drum and started playing traditional songs. Some people danced. Others told stories. The atmosphere shifted from sacred and serious to joyful and celebratory. Rebecca found herself laughing, really laughing for the first time in longer than she could remember. Daniel's grandfather pulled her aside as the evening was winding down. They sat on the porch together, watching the stars come out. "Thank you," Rebecca said, "for including me in something so special. For the blessing and the words and everything. I don't know if I deserve it, but I'm grateful." "Stop saying you don't deserve things," the old man said, not unkindly. "That's the old pattern. Break it. Every time you catch yourself thinking you're not worthy, stop and choose a different thought. It will feel like lying at first, but eventually it becomes truth." "How did you know I needed to hear all of that? About being enough?" "Because I've seen that same hunger in many people. The hunger to prove yourself, to earn your place in the world. It's especially common in people who are talented and creative. You think your gift is what makes you valuable, so you have to keep producing, keep achieving, keep risking everything to get the perfect result. But gifts aren't given to us to prove our worth. They're given to us to share, to enjoy, to use in service of something bigger than ourselves. Rebecca thought about that. I've been treating my photography like it's the only thing that matters. 6 months had passed since that night in the ceremony circle. 6 months of therapy sessions and hard conversations and moments of doubt, mixed with moments of genuine growth. Rebecca had gone back to Denver long enough to pack up her apartment, sell most of her furniture, and load everything that mattered into her truck. Then she'd driven back to Arizona, her heart pounding with equal parts excitement and terror. Moving across state lines for someone you'd known for less than a year was crazy. Her friends back in Denver had said so, though they'd said it gently with concern in their voices. But Rebecca wasn't moving just for Daniel. She was moving for herself, for the life she wanted to build, for the person she was becoming. She'd rented a small house on the edge of the reservation, close enough to the canyon that she could access it easily for work, but far enough that she had her own space, her own territory. The therapist had been clear about that. Don't move in together too quickly. Keep your own space while you continue working on yourself. Build a relationship from a foundation of two whole people, not two halves trying to complete each other. The house was small, but it had good light, and she'd converted one room into a proper workspace. Her photographs covered the walls, but they were different now than they used to be. Before, she'd focused on dramatic landscapes, extreme conditions, the kind of images that screamed, "Look what I was brave enough to capture." Now her work was more intimate, more human. She'd started a new project with Daniel's grandfather's blessing and guidance. She was documenting the lives of Apache families on the reservation, not the stereotypical images tourists wanted to see, but real moments. A grandmother teaching her granddaughter to weave, teenagers laughing at a basketball game, a father showing his son how to track deer through the forest. Ordinary moments that told extraordinary stories about resilience and tradition and adaptation. The work was challenging in new ways. She had to build trust with her subjects, had to listen more than she shot, had to be patient in ways her old work had never required, but it was deeply satisfying. She was creating something that mattered, something that honored the people who had welcomed her into their community. Daniel's grandfather had become one of her favorite subjects. She'd spent hours photographing him, capturing the wisdom in his weathered face, the careful way he worked with traditional tools, the gentleness in his eyes when he looked at his grandchildren. One of those portraits now hung in a small gallery she'd opened in the nearest town. The gallery had been Daniel's idea, actually. "You need to stop chasing the perfect shot in dangerous places," he'd said. "What if instead you built something here? Something permanent that could showcase not just your work but other artists too." So she had... The gallery was small, just 2 rooms in a converted storefront, but it was hers. She showed her own photography alongside work by local Native American artists. Paintings, pottery, beadwork, sculpture. The opening had been packed, and to her surprise, people were actually buying things. Not getting rich money, but enough to pay rent and buy supplies and occasionally splurge on dinner out. More importantly, the gallery had given her a sense of purpose beyond just her own achievement. She was creating a space for other artists, amplifying voices that deserved to be heard, building bridges between cultures. It felt important in a way her old work never had. Her relationship with Daniel had deepened too, though it hadn't always been easy. There had been fights, moments when her old patterns kicked in and she pushed him away, or when his fear made him too protective and she had to set boundaries. But they'd worked through it. They talked. They went to couples counseling. They made mistakes and apologized and tried again. 3 months after she'd moved to Arizona, Daniel had asked her to move in with him. She'd said no gently, explaining that she needed her own space still, that she was still learning how to be a whole person on her own before she could truly share her life with someone else. He'd been hurt at first, but he'd understood. And actually, the space between them had made their time together sweeter. They had to be intentional about seeing each other, had to choose to be together rather than just defaulting to it out of convenience. Now, as Rebecca stood in her gallery putting the final touches on a new exhibition, she felt something she'd never felt before: contentment. Not the manic high of getting a perfect shot or the validation of professional success, just a quiet, steady sense that she was exactly where she needed to be. doing exactly what she needed to be doing. The bell above the door chimed, and Daniel walked in carrying 2 coffee cups and a bag that smelled like fresh pastries. "Sustenance," he announced. "You've been here since dawn. You need to eat. Has it been that long?" Rebecca checked her phone and was surprised to see it was almost 11. "I got caught up in the hanging. This new series is tricky to arrange. Let me see." Daniel set down the coffee and studied the wall she'd been working on. The photographs showed different Apache families engaged in everyday activities, but arranged in a way that told a larger story about continuity and change, tradition and adaptation. "It's powerful," he said quietly. "You've really captured something important here, Rebecca. My grandfather is going to love it. I hope so. I'm nervous about the opening tonight. What if people think I'm exploiting your culture? What if they think I have no right to be telling these stories? Then they'll tell you and you'll listen and you'll learn." Daniel handed her a coffee. "You've spent 6 months building relationships with these families, asking permission, sharing your work with them before showing it publicly. You've done this the right way. Trust that." Rebecca took a sip of coffee and felt some of her anxiety ease. This was another change in her. Before, criticism would have destroyed her, sent her spiraling into self-doubt and desperate attempts to prove herself. Now, while she still cared about what people thought, she didn't let it define her worth. She could hear feedback, consider it, learn from it without falling apart. "Hey," Daniel said, pulling a small turquoise stone from his pocket. "I wanted to give you this before tonight gets crazy." Rebecca recognized it immediately. It was the kind of stone used in traditional Apache commitment ceremonies. Her heart started beating faster. "Before you panic," Daniel said, smiling slightly. "This isn't a proposal." "Not exactly. It's more like a promise. A symbol of commitment." "Tell me more," Rebecca said, her mouth suddenly dry. "In our tradition, giving someone turquoise means you're promising to walk beside them. Not ahead, not behind, but alongside, as equals. As partners." He pressed the stone into her hand. "I'm not asking you to marry me right now. I know we both still have growing to do, but I am asking if you want to build a life together. Officially, intentionally, with the understanding that we're in this for the long haul." Rebecca looked at the stone in her palm. It was smooth and warm, the blue-green color of the falls where she'd first seen Daniel through the mist. "Where everything had started, what would that look like?" she asked. "Building a life together?" "I don't know exactly. We'd figure it out as we go. Maybe eventually you move into my place, or I move into yours, or we find somewhere new that's ours together. Maybe we get married someday, or maybe we don't. Maybe we have kids, or travel the world, or just keep doing what we're doing, but knowing we're committed to each other through it all." He took her free hand. "The specifics matter less than the intention. I want to choose you every day for as long as you'll let me, and I want you to choose me. Not because you need me or because you're afraid to be alone, but because we make each other's lives better." Rebecca thought about the woman she'd been 6 months ago. Broken, reckless, running from herself. That woman would have either run away from this moment or jumped in too fast, desperate for someone to make her feel whole. But the woman she was now could actually consider the question thoughtfully. Did she want to build a life with Daniel? Yes, she absolutely did. "I want that too," she said, closing her fingers around the stone. "I want to choose you. I want to build something real and lasting with you. And I want to do it as 2 whole people who are better together than apart." Daniel pulled her close and kissed her, and Rebecca felt that same sense of rightness she'd felt at the ceremony 6 months ago. This wasn't about fixing each other or saving each other or completing each other. It was about 2 people choosing to walk the same path, supporting each other while each did their own growing. That evening, the gallery was packed for the opening. Daniel's family came, including his grandfather, who stood in front of his own portrait for a long time before finally nodding with satisfaction. Community members came, some curious, some skeptical, all of them taking the time to really look at the photographs and share their reactions. Not everyone loved everything. One older woman told Rebecca that she'd captured her grandson too casually, that he should have been photographed in more traditional clothing. Rebecca listened, thanked her for the feedback, and made a mental note to be more mindful about how she represented people in future work. Another man said he appreciated that she'd shown real life instead of the romanticized version tourists expected. A teenager asked if Rebecca could teach her about photography, said she'd never thought of it as something she could do until she saw these images.